One run, you're a sharpshooting menace who shreds enemies before they can get anywhere near you. The next, you're a hulking tank, shrugging off hits up close and personal while your powers control entire crowds. Same game, same world, but a different you. This is Shape of Dreams, a new roguelite that's had me hooked lately, and a definite contender for Roguelite of the Year. In this video, I'm going to use Shape of Dreams as a jumping off point for talking about the philosophy of the self, about our identity, what makes us who we are, and how we make ourselves who we are. Shape of Dreams allows for a high degree of building, or character customization, through which the player determines what the player character's abilities are, how they move, how they behave, how they fight. Some games, particularly RPGs, allow for a kind of character customization that includes but goes beyond action and combat into things like intelligence, charisma, perception, and speech. But however deep the process of character customization goes, or whatever aspects of the human condition it includes, building your character and customizing them is the way that video games dramatize the process of constructing identity and putting it into playable form. Whether you're improving a character's speech capabilities, intelligence, or combat proficiency, or changing the way they fight, you're shaping who they are within the context of the game. So every time you start a new run, you're not just choosing a build, you're constructing an identity. You're creating a fictional self. All of which opens up some surprisingly deep philosophical questions about freedom, identity, and the construction of the self. What does it mean to say that the self is constructed? And what limits are there on my freedom to construct myself? Here's how Shape of Dreams works. Like many great roguelites, the narrative is absolutely paper thin. There's been some sort of rupture between the real world and the dream world, so people are running in and out of dreams, killing stuff. It's somehow vaguely cool, but doesn't matter at all. Basically, you're going to be journeying in and out of different dreams, killing lots of stuff, leveling up, upgrading your character, taking on bosses, and so on. Shape of Dreams gives you 8 different travellers to choose from and unlock. My favourite so far is the first one you get, Sartre, a lizard sniper who wears a cowboy hat. I mean, what's not to love? The travellers start with unique abilities and playstyles. Each has a locked-in regular attack and passive ability that you can't change, along with a choice of 4 possible memories or abilities that you can equip 2 of at the start. Memories all have a cooldown. And all of this is just the beginning. There are also 2 additional ability slots that you can attach memories to, and you can attach 3 essences to each memory. There are over 150 memories and essences in total, each of which has the potential to dramatically change how you play and how you build your character. Stack them right and you can create insane synergies which fill the screen with big numbers, even if you're somewhat like me and you often aren't entirely sure of how the synergy is actually working. There are other things available which let you customize the experience even more, but let's just stick with that for a moment. In other words, Shape of Dreams and games like it don't hand you fully fixed identities. It hands you a set of raw materials and challenges you to make a character out of them, to express yourself through designing someone else. This brings us straight to existentialist philosophy, specifically Jean-Paul Sartre's idea that existence precedes essence. What does that mean? Well, traditionally, philosophers thought that things, including people, had an essence first, a fixed nature or a blueprint. This idea goes back a long way. Plato's theory of forms argued that the things of this world are imperfect copies of the perfect abstract forms of whatever they are. So a book is an imperfect copy of the form of the book, which is like the unchanging, perfect essence of books, the blueprint from which all actual books are made. Aristotle argued that the essence of a thing is its fundamental nature, what it is to be that thing. He thought that a thing's essence consisted in a set of necessary properties that define it, make it what it is, and distinguish it from other things. So the essence of a human being, for Aristotle, is that it's a rational animal. That is the distinguishing, essential feature that makes human beings what they are. Other features, like eye colour, are non-essential. They can vary from person to person, but all people still have the essential characteristic of being a rational animal. But in both Plato and Aristotle's theories, the essence is what comes first, and what makes a thing what it is. A book can only be a book because there's a perfect, unchanging essence of books in which all books partake. A person can only be a person because they possess the essential nature of being a rational animal. This essence determines what they end up being, so we might say that essence precedes existence. Essence comes first, so things can exist. But Sartre argued that for humans it's the other way around. For us, existence precedes essence. We exist first and only later define what we are through our choices. Objects created for a specific purpose might have a pre-given essence, but the same can't be said of us. Sartre uses the example of a paper knife. Knives are clearly made by people who create them for a preconceived purpose. We need to cut things, so people started making knives, objects specifically designed to cut things. So we can say that the knife's essence precedes its existence. It was fully imagined in the mind of a creator before it was created. Then they created it, then it exists. But can the same be said of humans? Are we really created by a creator with a specific purpose in mind, with a specific nature, an essence, in the way that a knife is? Sartre argued that because there's no God, clearly not. We exist first and then create our essence ourselves afterwards. As he says in a famous lecture called Existentialism is a Humanism. What do we mean by saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that man first of all exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. If man, as the existentialist sees him, is not definable, it is because to begin with, he is nothing. He will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself. Thus there is no human nature, because there is no God to have a conception of it. Man simply is. Not that he simply is what he conceives himself to be, but he is what he wills. And as he conceives himself after already existing, as he wills to be after that leap towards existence. Man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. We are left alone without excuse. That is what I mean when I say that man is condemned to be free. Condemned because he did not create himself, yet is nevertheless at liberty, and from the moment that he is thrown into this world, he is responsible for everything he does. The existentialist does not believe in the power of passion. He will never regard a grand passion as a destructive torrent upon which man is swept into certain actions as by fate, and which is therefore an excuse for them. So whatever we are for Sartre, we make of ourselves. We're radically free to define ourselves and entirely responsible for who we are, every moment of our lives. In Shape of Dreams, you don't begin with a defined essence. The traveller you pick gives some starting conditions, some boundaries to work within, but who you become in that run depends on the memories and essences you choose, how much resources you put into developing them, and which ones you choose to develop, the synergies you build with them, the hand you're dealt by luck, and how you respond to that hand. Your essence, your identity in that run, only takes shape gradually in line with the decisions you make in crafting it. Just like Sartre said, you exist first, then choose your essence. But let's complicate things. Sartre's philosophy sounds very empowering. It's a call for us to take on the responsibility of choosing freely, making ourselves what we want to be. He even criticised those who don't acknowledge this responsibility, who deny their radical freedom, as living in bad faith. In his most famous book, Being and Nothingness, Sartre considers the following example of bad faith. He says, let us consider this waiter in the cafe. His movement is quick and forward, a little too precise, a little too rapid. He comes toward the patrons with a step a little too quick. He bends forward a little too eagerly. His voice, his eyes, express an interest a little too solicitous for the order of the customer. Finally, there he returns, trying to imitate in his walk the inflexible stiffness of some kind of automaton, while carrying his tray with the recklessness of a tightrope walker by putting it in a perpetually unstable, perpetually broken equilibrium, which he perpetually re-establishes by a light movement of the arm and hand. All his behaviour seems to us a game. He is playing at being a waiter in a cafe. The reason this waiter is living in bad faith for Sartre is because he's deliberately using his own freedom to limit his freedom to choose his own identity. Rather than take on the burden of radical freedom and decide who he wants to be for himself, he's limiting himself to a pre-given role offered by society, the waiter. And then he's letting his being, his movement, his speech, his identity be determined by it, rather than determining these things himself. But perhaps Sartre is too harsh on this waiter. People have to make a living. Maybe this guy didn't have much of a choice, and the job he ended up with despite the fact that he didn't really want it. How many people are there out there working jobs they don't like because they need to make rent and because the job market is tough? Maybe this waiter's socio-economic conditions forced him to take this job, and the way he manages to deal with it and keep it is by throwing himself into the role. In this picture, the waiter doesn't seem as radically free as Sartre makes him out to be. But perhaps our freedom has limits. In the work of Michel Foucault, we can find an interesting counterpoint to what Sartre says about freedom and choosing our identity. Foucault is famous for making the case that every aspect of our lives is somehow touched by power, that the influence of power is felt throughout the social field, that wherever there is an interaction between people, there is power. As he puts it in Power Knowledge, it seems to me that power is always already there, that one is never outside it. Power is coextensive with the social body. There are no spaces of primal liberty between the meshes of its network. But if it's true that literally every aspect of our lives in every moment is shaped by competing forces of power, then there are significant limitations on our freedom. We could maybe excuse the waiter's excessive waiterliness by pointing out that he is there because of the socio-economic conditions and power relations that shape his life, that he had no choice in the matter. He was forced into that role, forced to play that role if he wants to keep his head above water. But Sartre says that we have no such excuses. In Existentialism as a Humanism, he explicitly says that he doesn't believe that people are swept into certain actions as if by fate, and are therefore excused of them. But does it really make sense to speak of radical freedom if what Foucault says about power is true, that we are everywhere, always guided and shaped by it? While Foucault acknowledged the omnipresence of power throughout our lives, that power somehow affects and influences everything we do, there is a place that power cannot fully dominate, our inner relationship to ourselves, through which we make ourselves who we are, through which we decide how to think, how to act, what attitude to have, what to value, and so on. Foucault argued that because we always have this free relationship with ourselves, we are still free to construct ourselves. It's just that there will always be limits on our capacity to do this, and at any given point in history, there will only ever be limited courses of action available or permitted to us because of how power and history shape our lives. This brings us to Foucault's idea of technologies of the self, practices through which we shape our identities and which are always available to us despite the omnipresence of power in our lives. Foucault says that technologies of the self permit individuals to effect by their own means or with the help of others a certain number of operations on their own bodies and souls, thoughts, conduct, and way of being, so as to transform themselves in order to attain a certain state of happiness, purity, wisdom, perfection, or immortality. But even these techniques are not purely individual acts of freedom. They're shaped by social forces, traditions, and systems of power, but we can still take and use them as we see fit, applying them to ourselves to become the kind of people we want to be. Foucault therefore saw the self as not just chosen, but constructed through technologies of the self, even as this construction is shaped by practices, disciplines, cultural techniques, and the machinations of power. In an article about Foucault, Ian Hacking explained that in Foucault's philosophy, each human subject, you, me, is an artifact, constructed by us using the limited tools we have available in the limited space made available to us by power. Now if we turn back to Shape of Dreams, we can see that while you're free to build however you want, your freedom is structured. You can't invent a traveller from nothing. You're always working within a particular game, within systems that developers created, with the pieces they gave you, under the constraints of balance and design. In other words, your build is an artifact in the way that the late Foucault thought yourself is. It's your identity which you have a role in shaping from within, but it's simultaneously shaped by systems that you didn't choose. But if we're always shaped by the designer's intentions and always working within their constraints, how free are we really when constructing builds in their game? Won't we always be somehow guided towards particular courses of action, particular builds, particular decisions? In Shape of Dreams, each character has 4 memory slots, and each memory has 3 essence slots, which is not that hard to get your head around, right? On the face of it, it's even quite a simple infrastructure in which to build a character. Players of extremely complex games like Path of Exile might look at this and think it's even somewhat restricting in what you're able to do. But consider this. I dug into the math behind this a bit, or more accurately, I asked ChatGPT very nicely if it would dig into the math behind this a bit for me, and using this equation, it worked out how many possible build combinations you can have in Shape of Dreams, or a kind of approximation anyway. Now the game's Steam page says there are 150 memories and essences in Shape of Dreams. If we assume that there are 50 memories and 100 essences, the number of possible build combinations available to you in this system, apparently, is 4.83 times 10 to the 28. That's this number, which is a hell of a lot. So even though at the beginning of the game you have to pick from a set stock of characters, the possibilities for what you can do with them and the kind of characters you can make out of them are huge. So huge, in fact, that there's no conceivable way that the developers could have possibly foreseen all of them. Which is almost like a mathematical illustration of Foucault's point. Even if your freedom is limited by certain structures of power or your historical epoch, you can still have a huge amount of freedom to operate within these limits and construct your identity. Maybe that's what Shape of Dreams and character building games really dramatise, this tension between freedom and construction. On the one hand, every build somehow feels like your own, your traveller, your memories, your essences, your dream. That's Sartre's freedom in action. On the other hand, every choice is framed by what's available, by what the system allows, and what possible synergies exist. This reflects Foucault's idea of the self as a constructed artifact made within particular limitations and particular configurations of power. You craft yourself, but always within the structures and constraints available. So who are we when we build? Are we the free agents that Sartre imagined, defining ourselves entirely through our choices? Or are we, as Foucault might say, an artifact, the product of practices and systems you didn't design, but which you work within to shape yourself? In Shape of Dreams, or any game which provides significant possibilities for character construction, maybe we're both. Every playthrough is a negotiation between our freedom to choose and the systems that make our choices possible. And that's not just the Shape of Dreams, that's the shape of our very lives. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Breaking the Game. Do like and subscribe and hit the bell if you feel like it to see more deep dives into philosophy, video games, and the connection between the two. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.